Hey guys, it's Kelsey here from roughandtumblefarmhouse.com, your best friend on the homestead. And today we are talking about your chicken eggs and why maybe they didn't incubate. If you had a hatch that didn't work out for you well, or if you're about to hatch some eggs, I'm going to tell you all the things you want to watch for to make sure you have the best hatch possible. So real quick, I just want to give a little bit of, a trigger warning on this video. I'm going to be using a lot of language talking about eggs and fertility and things like that. And I know that can be a very sensitive subject for people. And so I just wanted to give kind of a heads up that I will be using a lot of that language in this video. So if that's a sensitive topic for you at all, please just be aware. So first things first, when it comes to issues with incubating your eggs, is you want to be selecting really good eggs. You want eggs that are egg shaped, if that makes any sense. Ones that are really kind of oblong shaped, ones that have really, you can tell, kind of brittle, thin shells. Those are no-goes. Just crack those and make omelets out of them. You don't want to use those ones for incubating eggs. Also, it's best to avoid eggs that are overly dirty. I know that can really be a challenge if you are hatching duck eggs, for example, but when it comes to chicken eggs, you definitely want ones that aren't super dirty if you can avoid it. So try and find cleaner looking eggs. You also want eggs that aren't too old. So eggs that you're going to use for incubating, you want them to be a week old, no more than that. Otherwise, the fertility is going to really start to go down on those eggs. You can hatch eggs that are older than a week, but really you're going to get the best viability if they are within about a week old. Something else you want to watch for with your eggs is temperature. So if you are trying to hatch eggs pretty early in the spring, if you are collecting when you're still getting freezing temperatures, you want to make sure you get out there and collect eggs probably a couple times a day so those eggs haven't had too much of a chance to cool down. And the eggs you have collected, you want to keep them at a room temperature. You do not want to store them in the refrigerator before you are trying to hatch them. So make sure that those eggs come out at chicken body temperature, maybe cool down to around room temperature, but certainly staying above, I'd say, what is a fridge at? Is it around like 37 to 40 degrees? You want the eggs to stay warmer than that, ideally, if you're going to be using them for hatching. So you're setting yourself up with good eggs so they're not too old, they haven't gotten cold, the eggs themselves look like they're pretty sturdy. And then the next thing you want to look for is making sure you have eggs that are actually fertilized. So this might seem kind of basic, but you need to have a rooster to have eggs that are going to hatch. A rooster is going to fertilize the eggs inside of a female, and then that is how you get fertile eggs. And interestingly enough, after a rooster has mated with a hen, there will be fertilized eggs in her for, I believe it's up to 2 weeks. There can be from that particular rooster. So if you are looking for eggs that are just from one specific rooster, you want to separate those hens away from any other roosters. Like I said, I'm pretty sure it's 2 weeks, but I'll put a little note down here if I have that wrong. For at least 2 weeks, and then put her with the rooster you want to be the baby daddy if you are trying to breed for specific colors or traits or something like that. So you want to make sure you actually have fertile eggs. So if you're not having successful hatches, the fertility of your eggs is something you want to check. So that's something you can check by cracking eggs open and looking. There's a little spot that you want to see on those eggs to know for sure that they have been fertilized. However, another thing you can check for is look for egg development. So if you are, as you're incubating eggs, you should be taking an egg out, or taking all the eggs out after the first week and candling them to look for development. Usually you see some blood vessels starting to develop, that sort of a thing. If you're not seeing any of that development, if the eggs just kind of light up like a light bulb and there's no kind of dark shape starting to form in there, then chances are good that your eggs just weren't fertilized. Your rooster isn't doing that job, is not fertilizing the eggs. And so that's probably where your problem is going to stem from. So either get a different rooster out there, maybe get some more roosters, pen the rooster with the females, see if that makes a difference. Or it could be that your rooster himself is just not, is shooting blanks. Could be. This is not an impossibility in the animal kingdom. So the other things you want to check for to make sure you are going to be having the best hatching possible is your incubator setup. So the main thing here is just making sure your incubator is maintaining a good temperature and good humidity, and that your eggs are being turned. So ideally you want an incubator that has a turner. Otherwise, multiple times a day you need to rotate those eggs. It's best if the eggs are pointed inwards as well, with so that would be, the air sac would be in the back. They just turn easier that way in an automated turner. So making sure you have a turner, or you are turning your eggs several times a day. Making sure the temperature stays consistent, should be around 99 degrees, 100 at most for the duration of their incubation. You want to make sure they have good airflow. So following the instructions on your particular incubator in terms of having, mine has a little window you can open, some have little plugs you can pull out to make sure there's getting adequate airflow in there, because those little chicks as they're developing are pulling air through their shell. And if they aren't getting enough airflow, they actually can suffocate. So making sure they have a good setup there. That humidity should be maintained again as well. You want between about 55 and 60 degrees or 60% humidity, during the first 18 or so days of incubation. And then you want to jack that up to between 65 and 70 for later, for the last 3 days. And that'll just kind of help those shells be a little softer for the chicks to poke through. And if it's too humid in there, it can cause problems with them being kind of too wet and kind of bogged down. And if it's not humid enough, then the shells are kind of dry and stiff, and the membrane inside can kind of dry out, and it's harder for them to hatch. So those are some things you want to look for. If your incubator is disturbed at all, that can be another issue. If it gets unplugged, for example, or you lose electricity for some reason, that can change the effectiveness of your hatch. I have a whole video. I will put a little link up here. You can click, also link it in the description box. You can watch about what to do if your incubator loses power. So if it's been less than 12 hours and you follow the steps in there, then you should be okay. They might hatch, maybe a half a day to a day later than you expected because their development slowed down. But if it's 12 hours or more, you're probably going to see a big drop in your hatch rate, unfortunately. Some other reasons why your eggs just might not hatch, might not incubate, can just be issues with the eggs themselves. So going back to picking out good eggs, if the eggs had a crack or something, it's a good idea to candle the eggs you are going to incubate to make sure there aren't any little cracks you can't see, because then it won't happen potentially, or most likely it won't. If it's, a big double-sized egg, for example, I looked it up. There is no historical record of anyone hatching out, when you crack an egg, it's like, oh, it's a double yolker. Those are not going to hatch chicks. They might start to develop, but then they have always died because there are not enough resources in that egg to properly develop 2 chickens. So I wouldn't do that. It seems kind of cruel almost to try that, because they're not gonna make it. So those sort of issues with the egg can be part of the problem. So if it's not one of all the other issues we've talked about, the cleanliness of the eggs, temperature, all those sort of things, you are definitely going to have chicks that just start to develop and then stop. And we don't know why that can be, but that's just kind of one of those things where we trust to nature that there was something that wasn't going right. And in this hatch, for example, I had 22 eggs in there. 20 of the 22 hatched. 1 after the first week it was developing. When I checked it after the second week, it had stopped. It hadn't developed anything past the first week. And so there's just something about it that was a little bit not how it was supposed to be. And so nature just stopped and it didn't develop any further. And then it's heartbreaking too. The other one, I could feel my 22nd egg, I could feel that it was heavy, like that there was a chick in there, but it didn't pip. It didn't make the little hole to, start hatching, and it never hatched at all. So it developed all that way and then it never hatched. And I won't ever know why, but there was something about that particular chick that it just wasn't going to make it. So that can be really tough and hard to kind of stomach, but that's just one of the realities of life. So those are all the things. If you make sure that you are checking for those things, maintaining your incubation space as best as you can, you should really have really good success with hatching your chicks. So if you found this useful, I will link some other videos over here that you can check out. I also am launching very soon my chicken keeping course, which is going to take you all the way from hatching your own chicks if you want to, or buying chicks, to raising them up, having laying hens, and then eventually, sorry, my cat's interrupting me. And eventually, if you need to or want to, cooking them up in a pot. I'm covering everything from hatching to dispatching in this chicken keeping course. A link to that below. That is launching soon, or maybe already launched, depending on when you're watching this video. Thank you so much for joining me today. We'll see you next week for more farming, family food, and fortitude here at our Rough and Tumble farmhouse.